Hello, everyone. I'm Dennis Tebbett, Chair of the Pearcey Institute. It's my privilege to welcome you all this afternoon to the Digital Innovation Festival 2021 Pearcey Institute Roundtable on the Future of Work. As is custom, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the Boonwurrung and Wurrung, Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and all of the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, are based. We also acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging, whose stories, traditions, and living cultures in this country are a valuable resource, as are those all who've come to make Australia their home. Together, we are Australians. Today's roundtable is generously sponsored by the Victorian Government as part of the DIF 2021 festival, which kicks off from today through to the 8th of September. The DIF is an initiative of the State Government of Victoria, delivered in collaboration with a network of partners, and is open for everyone to get involved. With over 300 events, there's something for everybody, and I encourage you to jump online and check out what's available at visitdiff.vic.gov.au. And a very big thank you and a warm welcome to our 6 contributors today. Dr. Sean Gallagher, Sarah Rogers, Peter Brooks, Adele Simon, Dr. Ian Otterman, and Professor Jane Burns. I should have said Professor Peter Brooks, of course, but that's, I apologise, that's out of familiarity with Peter, for generously sharing their valuable time and perspectives on such a pertinent topic in today's changing world. In the interest of time, I'm going to be keeping introductions brief this afternoon. We've got a glorious content for you from these broadly and deeply knowledgeable people working in this sector. However, you can read all about our esteemed contributors on their event page, just being shared in the chat room now. We also encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourself to your peers online today and ask questions of our speakers during the session. Noting, we also expect to have a Q&A session for that at the end. We will be moving to Q&A after all our 6 contributors have had the opportunity to share their opinions, thoughts and views on this topic. Please also note we're recording today's session, which will be available on the Pearcey YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Now, I spent a lifetime around the world as an executive, being the person who goes in to transform businesses. And there's only 2 things that really, I used to say, happen when I arrive. People come and people go. And the thing that I've learned most through transforming businesses is that the greatest challenge for you is not working out the business model, but it's actually getting everybody to understand that change is not such a bad thing after all. Psychologically, we know from history and from those who studied the basics of psychology that very few people actually really enjoy the change process. I, unfortunately, happen to be one of those annoying people who look forward to Christmas and Easter so that I can move the furniture around and welcome guests into the house. It frustrates my wife, but I love every minute of it. This particular topic, nearly 40 years ago, I sat in a presentation where I was told that technology was going to change the way we work. We wouldn't have filing cabinets anymore. We wouldn't be able to lean on the filing cabinet and have a meeting in the office. We wouldn't have typing pools anymore. We wouldn't have a lot of things. Offices would change dramatically. And indeed, all those things have come to fruition, not only prior to the advent of the mobile phone, but subsequently. And of course, prior to the last 18 months, that wonderful concept of having an open working space where you get in early in the morning and fight for a desk. You know, these are all wonderful concepts, but the reality is we're in a period now that is bringing to the fore some very significant changes across a broad range of industries, and we've seen how that impacted health. I really don't want to say any more because I want to leave it to the experts to talk, and I want to introduce Sean Gallagher as Director of the Centre for the New Workforce at Swinburne University of Technology, who's produced some outstanding work, a report and also a survey. And Sean, I'd love you to share with us your thoughts and views to kick this session off this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much, Dennis, and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, wherever you come from. Let me just bear with me a moment while I share my screen, and going to minimize the speaker view. So I want to talk to you today about what I call innovation in the unprecedented era. It's out of a report that we've done recently, and it really is focused on one of the futures of work that no doubt we'll hear many different versions of this afternoon. I too would like to acknowledge that I stand on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. 2020 changed work forever. 2021 is changing it again, and who knows what's going to happen next year. There are many different futures of work, and I just want to let you know that where we focus on at the Center for the New Workforce is the how, the where, and the what. And the how is about capabilities for individuals. So what kind of skills do workers require that aren't found in their job classifications? In the where, how do we, when we're focusing on what we call the new office, how do we meaningfully connect people to create value and bring them together to, again, in a physical workplace, but in a hybrid working environment? And the what, it's focused on innovation, and it's fundamental to our ability to navigate uncertainty and create value. And this is where I want to kick off today and focus on the innovation, the what. Australia faces disruption on steroids. That was a pretty provocative headline that jumped off the back of the Fin Review a couple of months ago. And it foretells of Andrew Forrest and his Fortescue Future Industries about a mammoth disruption in energy as they tried to use renewable energy and hydrogen to turn Australia into a green steel powerhouse. What I like about this story is that Andrew Forrest isn't waiting for legacy industries to be disrupted by the complex world around him. He's seeking to be a disruptor himself and to create new ones. And I think this cartoon kind of sums up a lot of what we are experiencing at the moment. You know, the old business plans and strategies that look so perfect on paper really aren't worth their salt, particularly in the complex world we find ourselves in. It's not just about solving problems, it's about finding the right problems from that disruption. And there's a lot of companies that are doing this pretty well, like Infosys, Ravi Kumar, who's the president. Increasingly, he's wanting to hire people who do not have degrees and who have diverse interests in arts, literature, science, anthropology. He's not looking just for problem solvers, so software engineers and so on. He's looking for problem finders. That's where the most value is to be created, in finding the right problem. And the same, perhaps, where it all started is with Toyota. And many of you will know the Toyota production system and the big red button, where every employee is empowered to stop the entire assembly line. I mean, it's anathema to efficient production, but they're empowered to stop the entire assembly line if they notice a defect or a variation. Other employees then come together to figure out what's going on and to make a case to inform management as to what it is and the solution that they have. This problem finding and solving continues today, and I think Toyota has a KPI of the number of problems found per employee per year. Finding the problem is essential to really driving and creating value. I think we are living and working in what I call the unprecedented era. It's not just the global mega challenges that we know and don't really like so much, some of them, you know, the pandemic, globalization, climate change. It's those combined with the profound transformation of society from digital technologies. You know, it's the pace of change, it's the interdependencies and hyperconnectivity, and it's these digital ecosystems that are always expanding and evolving. That combined with these global mega challenges is, I think, without precedent. And just in the same way that we all came to know the term disruptive innovation by Clay Christensen from Harvard a few years ago, where legacy industries, legacy companies were disrupted by a new technology, I think we now need to move our thinking from disruption to complex disruption. And it's witnessed where in this complex world that we're in, we witness it at the rapidly changing demand patterns of our business, the changes in our customers' expectations and behaviors. They're always changing, which means that if we're not constantly innovating, either upgrading our existing products and services and solutions to meet that changing demand pattern, then the value that we have is constantly eroding. This is the report that I was pleased to launch a couple of months ago, Peak Human Workplace, Innovation in the Unprecedented Era. And its message is quite simple. I think organizations need to face complex disruption head on in order to create value. Just in that way that cartoon suggested, that is where the greatest potential for value creation lies, in that complex disruption. It's also where the gravest threats are. And to do this, I think we need to harness the creative power of people. And like with Infosys and like with Toyota, it all starts with an idea. We've long known that new ideas flourish when knowledge boundaries are pushed, especially when you bring together lots of people around the table. Learning and collaboration. But exactly what forms of learning and collaboration are ideal for finding these new ideas, especially in these highly complex and rapidly dynamic environments? We surveyed 1,000 Australian workers to find out. This is the key result. What are the ideal workplace settings to drive innovation in complex disruption? It's worker-driven learning and collaboration diversity. Worker-driven learning is where the worker is empowered to do the learning that they need in the flow of work. We all know the 70-20-10 rubric of learning and work, where 10% is formal structured learning. Well, it's the 70 and 20 that are ideal for really generating ideas. That ability, being workers doing complex new tasks or trying new things. And the 20 is working and sharing knowledge with their colleagues and working together and solving problems as a team. It's the 70 and 20, which are really ideal for driving new ideas. And on the other side is collaboration diversity. It's not just teamwork. It's not just working with your fellow colleagues. It's actually about working with colleagues who do not look like yourself, bringing together workers from across the organization, a diversity of roles, a diversity of levels, a diversity of responsibility. And that diversity extends well beyond expertise. It's also a diversity of perspective and vantage point on a problem. Worker-driven learning and that collaboration diversity are ideal for solving complex problems. We suggest that organizations need an institutional capability to turn disruption into value. We call it an innovation architecture. At its core is a learning workplace. And at the next level is a value creation system. And then finally, having a culture that allows the organization to constantly innovate and also to adapt. This isn't a tech solution. This is a people solution. It's about making sure that your talent is as high performing and capable and competent and able to navigate uncertainty. It's also about having a system in which you bring together that opportunities to create value from disruption. And as I mentioned, that culture that wraps around it. Let me break down those three a little bit more. So the learning workplace, you probably, if I think of, going back to that 70-20-10, well, if you think of the learning in a workplace, if we think of it in two parallel yet complementary pathways to learning. One is what I call organization-driven learning. So that's that formal, structured type of learning that is often accredited. I think increasingly it needs to be delivered from platforms and to be more customizable. But ultimately, the highest value form of learning in the workplace is what we call worker-driven learning. It's learning in the flow of work. It's empowering workers to get over hurdles, to solve unforeseen problems, to tackle new challenges, and particularly to do it together with others. And as I mentioned, the highest value form of learning is actually creating new knowledge. That's worker-driven learning, and the worker and the learning workplace combines the two. A value creation system is one that's built on collaboration diversity. So disruption can occur on the front line. It can also occur out on the horizon. On the front line, think of the workers on the factory floor of Toyota. In this case, we could also see as, a change in customer behavior. Or out on the horizon, think of Andrew Forrest and his green steel energy. The green energy steel, this is also about identifying disruption from climate change. A value creation system is being able to identify opportunities in disruption and to generate ideas and then to turn them into something valuable. And this is really about being built on a diversity of collaboration, bringing together a diversity of perspective, ideas, as well as expertise to really make sure that we understand the complexity of the problem to better understand the opportunity to create value out of it. And then finally, we need an adaptive innovation culture. I like to see these as couplets, these 5 couplets. It's values and values. So organizations in this highly disruptive environment, having a strategic plan is not enough. It really is important to have a values-based mission that is always going to stand the test of time, regardless of what's going on around you. And the ultimate sort of goal or objective of the organization is to constantly create value. It's also about empower and trust. How do we empower all people to lead, not just leaders? And how do we entrust our workers to use their judgments in the flow of work? How do we empower them? It's also about lifting workers above and beyond their role and to see beyond the organization, not just doing their job, but to understand how their role fits into the perspective of the organization and the environment in which they operate. It's also about now and new. It's about stress testing the existing business models of the organization, seeing how where value is being eroded. It's also about pursuing new ideas, identifying those opportunities out of disruption to scale the business. And then finally, most importantly, it's also practiced and proficient. I think organizations, just like fire drills, just like you expect your flight attendant on the plane to have practiced the emergency escape drills, organizations in this highly complex and disruptive environment need to practice, explore, and exploit every day to be disruptive proficient, because when the next COVID-19 comes along, or when the next challenges out of China or globalization, that organizations are ready and able to adapt and to respond in a way that is focused on driving that value creation throughout the organization. So I want to quickly pull this together. So what is the future of work? I think one of the futures of work is that we need to see work is a pathway to innovation, that every worker should be empowered to innovate, that innovation isn't something that happens just in the R&D department or ideas in the C-suite, that every worker, just like in Toyota, just like in Infosys, just like in Fortescue Metals, every worker is empowered to tackle existing challenges in innovative new ways or to solve unforeseen problems. And that's going to help our organizations to constantly adapt. In other words, I think we need to not only reimagine work, but reimagine workers. That workers are not just producers of units of output, but they are value creators. And how you harness that creative potential is going to help our organizations constantly adapt and thrive in these environments. I like to finish off with this slide because it really brings what I think is back onto who we are. You know, we are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. When humans first walked the earth, it was our ability to identify patterns out of a changing and hostile environment, figuring out how to survive, and then telling stories about it. Why do I like to tell this story? Because it's innate to who we are. And in a world of highly complex disruption and digital technologies, it actually distinguishes us from those intelligent technologies. You know, the future is fast and messy, and we need humans to navigate it. I'll leave it there, but thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Sean, for giving us such a great kickoff and covering so many of the really important parts of a workforce. It reminded me so much of some terminology I've used in the past, asking people to develop long-term short-sightedness, look after today's business, but be aware of where we want to go and make decisions accordingly. I particularly like the idea, which is not new, of course, give people permission, let them have permission to contribute and to develop and be different. You know, I want to move on now with Sarah Rogers, who's a partner at Deloitte Consulting, and she spent a lifetime in this particular area. And I'm so keen to hear what Sarah is going to impart to us, having spent time in the corporate world, advising organisations in Europe, as well as here in Australia with the public sector and corporate side of things. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Sean, and everybody for this discussion. It's really great to be here with you today. Today, what I really want to do is to share some of the things that I'm seeing with our clients and some of the things that we're seeing that our clients are thinking about in the face of disruption, and indeed really complex disruption, as Sean's just been speaking about, and how they're seeking to really lead change and to elevate the role of humans in the organisations that they work in. And I love the close there that you had, Sean, around the reimagining work and the workplace. And I think elevating the role of humans in creating value is really a lot about what I want to be talking about with you today. So we'll go to the next slide, please. We want to talk about the future of work, and really that's around, you know, how do we bring people and technology together to really improve outcomes for people, for business, and also for the societies that we work in, that we exist in. And my firm belief is that the future of work is really now human. And I wanted to start with this quote from Bill McDermott, who's the CEO of ServiceNow, which is, you know, and the epitome of a tech executive. We interviewed Bill for our 2021 Human Capital Trends report. And as he notes, we really are in a truly human moment. We really believe that, you know, the future of work is about making work better for humans and making humans better at work. And I want to talk today about what we're seeing in organisations in terms of the way they are changing their work, what they're doing in terms of their ways of working, the capabilities, the places that they're providing for people, and really importantly, the way that they're leading, empowering and connecting with their workforce to help humans work more productively with technology. The next slide, please. So 2020 was obviously, and I think 2021 continues to be a year of massive disruption and change. And I think we've seen, you know, some organisations accelerating 5 to 6 years of change in just a few months. And certainly it was tough. We've seen organisations and their workforces really demonstrate extraordinary resilience and creativity through this time. You know, we've seen organisations that have previously, you know, been blocked by processes and internal reticence, really transforming the ways of working overnight, you know, teleworking, virtual working spaces. You know, we've seen organisations finding really new and different ways to reach their customers, to keep their commerce going, thinking about things like Providor or, you know, Isolate, which is an online music festival, Qantas providing flights to nowhere that we wouldn't have really thought about happening a few years ago. Leadership teams that really started to deconstruct old mindsets about physical presence as being the only way to get things done. We've seen, you know, the VPSC here in Victoria, where I'm based, rewriting their hybrid work policy. Some organisations such as Deloitte in the UK basically saying employees can decide permanently where they want to work from. We've also seen, I think, an increasing role of leaders and managers and people leading teams towards their employees and their personal needs. So, you know, at Deloitte, we've just released our hybrid work policy recently here in Australia, which is really around flex, which has got a massive focus on individual well-being and giving people the space that they need and the support that they need to balance work in a really different sort of dynamic. We've also seen organisations that perhaps didn't show up so well. So the Bayside Council in Sydney that banned staff from supervising kids while they were working from home. We've also seen organisations really refocusing on the core of what matters in terms of fundamental business needs and outcomes. And a lot of the clients I've worked with in the last year or so, such as the Transport Department here in Victoria and the CSIRO, have gone through significant reprioritisation and some strategy realignment around really core outcomes and making sure that they're continuing to really connect those to the citizen and the customers that they're serving. So I think, you know, we've really proved, I think, that organisations and workers within them can do really extraordinary things. And I think there's really a true call to action here about the central role of humans in work and how they experience work and how they can be enabled by work, rather than just thinking about how organisations are adapting to optimise existing processes. We'll go to the next slide. So what we've seen over the last decade really is sort of the changing way that we're thinking about humans and technology interacting. You know, we've been taking that influx of technology and really using its power to substitute human work without really asking, should we even be doing this? We've really focused on optimization of work. And I think last year, we've really started to think about and talk and hear our clients talking a lot more about the humanization of work and moving from a focus on technology to a focus on humans who are supported and enabled by technology. So it's about the technology enabling us rather than us adapting to the technology. And I think that has led to productivity gains, and it does represent, I think, a new kind of era in terms of hope of what we can get out of technology. So clients that we're talking to are saying, you know, how do we reconstruct work essentially so that we can really elevate those uniquely human skills? And Sean talked about those as well, being so central to really important value creation within organisations. And, you know, we're really thinking about, you know, talent. For now, talent is seen as one of our top risks to the organisation. So really that concept of putting our people at the centre, and I think mental health and wellbeing has been a really big topic as well. And I know that's going to be touched on later in this session. Might go to the next slide. Thanks. So similarly to sort of what Sean was outlining, we also have been thinking and talking about the future of work now for probably about the last 7 or 8 years in terms of these very, very important and deeply interconnected dimensions about the work. So the what people are doing, the workforce, which is the who, and then the workplace in terms of the where. But I think that the pandemic has really made us recognise that there's a bit of a missing piece in that framework. We really think that, you know, actually putting the human at the centre is the most important part of this, and really humanising the future of work so that we can, you know, get leaders and organisations to operate in new ways, to start thinking about an enterprise mindset, for example, to really understanding and recognising that one of the biggest motivators for people is actually the work itself, and really making sure that we're very clear for people about what's the mission that they're working towards. You know, how are they actually making sure that they're inspired by the work that they're doing, their connection to the outcomes, like those, you know, workers on the Toyota production lines. And then really trying to reorient in the way that we're thinking about people and how they work, and getting our people from past future potential, and thinking about human potential as a really valuable asset. And how do we make sure that we are to the best of our ability? Go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the first, I'm just going to speak quickly about these 3 pillars and some of the things that we're really seeing our clients, leading organisations globally, they start to sort of lean into and think about these big questions. You know, as I said before, really, when we're designing work without the future of work without work itself, I think it's a missed opportunity to unlock real value for organisations, for the workforce, and it's not just a series of steps or outputs. It motivates and inspires people, and it is the centre point for creativity and innovation, and You know, it should convey purpose and meaning and build connection and bring people together to innovate and to get things done better as a group of people rather than individuals. So what we're seeing work now being much more sort of designed around networks of teams that are actually responsible for the entire value chain of that piece of work and the creation of the work that they're doing. You know, organisations that we're talking to are thinking really deeply about how do they amplify and free up essentially individuals so that those uniquely human capabilities like emotional intelligence, innovation, creativity, risk-taking, conceptual thinking, communication, empathy, those things that machines can't do, how do we get machines to help us amplify those capabilities within our workforce rather than thinking about simply technology as a substitution for something that a human could otherwise do. So it's not sort of an either or a one-to-one trade-off. So we've worked with the Department of Defence for a long time here in Australia, where we've worked extensively in their Navy workforce around really redesigning their work essentially, but it's been also around giving, you know, their workforce a far more sort of meaningful experience and to reorganise careers. But what we've done there is to think about how do we elevate the role of the workforce by using collective intelligence, which is essentially AI, artificial intelligence, combined with human intelligence to create these super teams. So what we're seeing are organisations that are embracing these sorts of principles, are thinking about the interoperability between people and process and data and tech and strategy to really enable human and machine collaboration. You know, another example is the Department of Transport in Victoria, who are creating a digital twin of the entire department, essentially, which will give them real-time insight into things like traffic flows, accidents, incident responses, network planning, maintenance, among a range of other things. There are lots of organisations globally that are thinking about this in terms of what's the art of the possible to understand where the biggest disruption opportunities are available to them through reconstructing work and workflows and the tasks in those workflows using technologies or using different sorts of talent or being able to, you know, actually do that work in a different environment, doing it virtually. So they're using that sort of information to inform operating models and org design and ways of working, but always keeping the employee and the customer at the centre. And I know, you know, I'm sure that Peter's going to be speaking after me, Peter Brooks, around, you know, some of the really exciting examples in the healthcare sector, of which there are many, where work is being reconstructed to put the patient at the centre and to release workforce capacity and to deliver far more efficient and better services. So essentially, you know, re-architecting work is about shifting purpose from delivering output to about outcomes. So addressing and identifying really unseen problems, some of those sort of really wicked problems that, you know, Sean also alluded to. Expanding people's perspective around productivity from cost saving to much broader value creation, and maximising potential through really elevating those human capabilities and thinking about tech as an augmentation tool rather than a substitution opportunity. The next slide, please. The second pillar is around the workforce, so the people that are delivering this work. And I think, you know, the pandemic has really highlighted, we've all been inside each other's homes, we've met kids and dogs and all sorts of things. People are humans, you know, with stories, and we've all got, you know, limitless potential, I think, for flexibility. And it's really about looking beyond just the skills or the roles that people have been hired for, and really thinking about potential capabilities, motivation and capacity of people. How can you really unlock that potential? And we think that one of the key success factors to those is really tethering that workforce to the organisational mission and really creating a really strong sense of connection for workers with the higher purpose that they're actually a part of. So CSIRO, as many of you may be aware, communicated last year that about 30% of their workforce are going to be focused on missions going forward, which are really very large, big cross-functional programs of work that are intended to solve our nation's greatest challenges. So things like climate change, Indigenous health, in creation of a hydrogen industry. So really big unifying challenges, and being able to do that is really, you know, for them about being able to really explicitly bring together important different kinds of capability to deliver new and important outcomes for Australia. We're also seeing a lot of organisations moving into this concept of adaptable organisations. So things, organisations like IKEA globally, but also Bankwest here in Australia, are adopting principles of adaptability, which are really around how do you much more orient around the external outcome that you're delivering and focus on bringing collaboration and responsiveness into your organisation so that you can be more agile and you're much more purpose driven, that you're getting greater flexibility in the teams, more outcome-based roles, leaders who can manage at all levels. We're also seeing, another thing I think on the workforce front is organisations that are focusing much more on workforce planning and workforce strategy. So they're really recognising that it's important to get a handle on what capability they have so that when, in a crisis time or priorities changing, they can quickly move people around and they can actually have some visibility over the capability they have and the capability they need, both in the near term, but also obviously, from a strategic perspective over the longer term as well. We might go to the next slide if that's okay. So the final one is really around what's the environment and the workplace that we need to create in order to, put people into an environment, where they can collaborate, as we were talking about, where they can be innovative and they can really be empowered. I think that, things have changed dramatically. There is no, I don't think there's any real going back. We really do see the workplace now as, a physical and a virtual ecosystem. No matter where we work, we're going to be working digitally. We're going to be using digital tools. So I think, a lot of leading organisations are really rethinking their strategies about how they better engage and connect people and design those hybrid work models so that they can put people at the centre. We've worked with a couple of very big, a global cosmetic company who've completely redefined their employee value proposition to align around changing expectations of their workforce. And they've sort of got a 2023 aspiration for a different sort of world of work. They've really thought deeply about thinking about how and what work needs to get done and where and when does that work need to get done to really tailor some hybrid kind of work experiences for different functions and different geographies. We're seeing it all over the place. So we're seeing, organisations like Facebook that are looking to hire ahead of remote work, for example. And I think over 65% of employers in the UK are now planning to offer flexible working to their employees following the pandemic. So it's not just about space, it's also about leadership. And I think, it is such an important time, and there's such an opportunity for organisations to think differently now about how they want to create the environment for their people to be successful. I think one of the things that we really need to think about is, how do we create leaders who are truly inclusive and can create, psychological safety? They can bring those multidisciplinary capabilities together around important shared goals that they can then themselves actually operate in really ambiguous and changing contexts and are able to act as truly adaptive leaders that can empower their teams to solve new kinds of problems and to work in different ways. This is a challenge that organisations are facing into differing extents, but one that I think we know is absolutely going to be critical to enable all organisations to adapt and thrive in a future of work that really puts people at the centre of that. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. And I think putting people at the centre of work is a beautiful lead-in and segue to Professor Peter Brooks. There's been a realisation for most people who have not engaged with the health system over the past period of their life, only in the last 20, 30 months of finding that every day the health system is centre and focus. There's no bigger workforce that we have, and there's no bigger level of reliability that we have on keeping our economy going than being a healthy nation. I've asked Peter to give us some thoughts on the difference between working, of course, in a revenue-based industry and now an industry which we all know is an expense-based industry, very difficult, very focused on its bricks and mortar, and some would say less focused really on who the customer really is. So I'm looking forward to Peter's views and thoughts on what's happening in the healthcare industry and how that might change in the future based upon what we've seen? Peter?
Thanks, Dennis. I too want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we work and talk today, and acknowledge their elders, the elders, past, present, and emerging. Dennis has told us while we're looking at health, it's probably one of the most important things that we actually value in our life, if we've got one. It's also one of the largest workforces. I'm going to talk a little bit about telehealth, but it's all about, I think the terminology needs to change. We're talking about a virtual health system. That's what it's all about. One of the things we've got to know is that we need to know is that the use of technology has grown enormously rapidly in health over the last probably 10 years in particular. But some groups have used telehealth for quite a long time. For example, the VA system in the States, Kaiser Permanente, for example, in 2018, it used 50% of its 100 million consultations were by telehealth. And these changes have occurred quite rapidly. The PA hospital in Brisbane, which was the home of the Centre for Online Health, in fact, between about 2014 and 2017, moved roughly 45% of its outpatients to telehealth. That makes an enormous difference to taking, if you like, at least 60,000 patients out of a hospital. So they're the sorts of things that we're talking about. Telehealth really didn't take off until COVID hit us, and you can see there that's the Medicare telehealth services. Very, moderate increase up until about 2019, and then suddenly in about 4 days, boom, most outpatient services were converted directly to telehealth, and that's continued. Though it is a problem because the government's been very good in terms of funding that, but all the time we get drip fed this business that they'll continue now until December 2021. Well, what about after that? I can tell you the patients are going to be pretty angry if somebody in the government pulls the funding for telehealth. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit. You all know that the health system is really one of the most complex systems that we have. It's focused. I know it's focused on outcomes, but it's really focused on illness rather than health. I always talk about it as we've got an health system rather than a health system. It's not about prevention. And if we'd had prevention, we might not be here today. Well, we would be here today, but we wouldn't be on a Zoom. We'd be face to face. So the problem with health systems around the world, there isn't any one health system in the world that really is sustainable in terms of funding, is that we've got the sustainability gap. The demand for health services as we get older is going up. And not only that, but we, in the health innovation is developing all sorts of ways of helping patients or helping people to lead a better health. So the use of the health services and the demand is going up incredibly. And what we're also seeing, of course, is the funds to provide that with taxation, things like that, is diminishing. So Dennis's points about the business models are really something we have to look at in the future. Not rocket science. I mean, the VA system, interestingly, revolutionized its use of telehealth services between 2016 and 2018. They did a survey showing that with use of telehealth services, they would provide the same services, same outcomes with 60% fewer hospital days, 35% fewer hospital admissions, and a $2,000 saving per patient per year. So that's enormous when you think about it spread right across the system. Next slide. Next slide. So yes, in 1999, Peter Yellow, who's a psychiatrist, and I wrote a paper on online health, and it was really it said, well, you can read that, but the thing that we talked about was the fact that what technology would do would be to provide the wherewithal for patients to take control, or take much greater control of their health themselves, and that's really I think one of the things that's fostered this movement of the NHS, for example, no decision about me without me, real patient engagement in their own healthcare. And we created this cartoon, if you like, which sort of shows the providers, the people, the payers, and saying that there are so many things that digital or virtual will provide for us in terms of wearables, apps, monitoring your own blood pressure, monitoring your blood glucose if you've got diabetes. And all of those things, what those things do is to drive the ability of the patient, or encourage the patient to start to look after themselves and take some responsibility for their own healthcare. And as some people would say, also perhaps for the health of their neighbour. But we might get into that in terms of the discussion afterwards. So it's a very exciting time. But what would happen in this system is that the payers, whether they're governments or whether they're individuals, can shift to being players. The health systems around the world are getting extraordinarily expensive, and we're no different from Australia when you think about the out-of-pocket expenses, the problems that we have in funding from different streams, whether it's Commonwealth government or state governments, the arguments that go on about that. But what it means is that the providers from hospitals right through all health professionals can actually start to shift from being the navigator to the patient rather than the ship's captain. And that will, we really think, drive consumerism in a very major way. Next slide. So what we have to think about, and it's really interesting, I think, because the previous two speakers have talked about this, is how we can, what virtual does. Well, it makes delivery of healthcare time and place agnostic. Doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. You should be able to connect with your health professional and have a conversation, a real-time conversation, face-to-face conversation, whatever. I mean, virtual health, telehealth, it's just another way of communicating with the patient. And it's really, as I've said there, it should be the decision as to whether you do a face-to-face consultation or whether you do a telehealth consultation, really needs to be an understanding between the health professional and the patient. Both need to know what each virtual or face-to-face will deliver, and then you can make a decision about, you can make a joint decision about what you think's the thing to do in this particular situation. I think we've got to work towards a health system that's designed, co-designed with patients, with their families and their carers. One of the great things about telehealth is it allows health professionals to involve the whole family in discussions, carer, family, patient. So that again, it can encourage patient empowerment. And if we think about how healthcare is delivered, and we do really need to look at new models of care, what we're going to deliver, how we're going to deliver it, when we're going to deliver it, and who is going to deliver it. That defines the workforce that we need. And I'll just say one thing here, because I think that, and Sean alluded to this earlier, trialling change situations. Simulation, the use of simulation going forward, I think is going to be a real driver of health education, because I can tell you medical students, nursing students are not particularly, don't feel particularly easy at the moment in learning in an environment where there are patients who are infected with COVID or other things. So they're things that we really do need to think about. My next slide, final slide, is just so what do we do beyond COVID? Well, the first thing we've got to do is not ever stop telehealth benefits or any other benefits for technology. And as we go forward, then there's no reason why apps, whatever, if they're shown to be in clinical trials to be useful, why shouldn't they get Medicare benefits, exactly as we get for pharmaceutical benefits? So we need to develop a skilled workforce, and that workforce particularly needs to be digitally skilled. The other thing I think that we need to do is to, and if I was king for a day, I'd pay patients to look after themselves, because they're surely the ultimate part of the puzzle in terms of the health workforce. It's not just about empowering consumers; it's telling them, look, you have a responsibility, and we're going to provide you with to help look after your healthcare, and we'll provide you with the wherewithal to do that. So that's going to require a lot of very interesting health funding reforms. We've got to improve the digital ecosystem, which many of you are going to be much better than I am about that. And it's got to be integrated. Virtual health has to be integrated into routine practice. And we have to do a whole bunch of things, I think, in terms of what we deliver, because we still in Australia, and this is around the world, we still probably do 20% of what we call low-value care, which is care that really doesn't make a big difference to the patient. And so we've got to shift, if you like, from in terms of the three policy targets, shift from volume to value. We've got to have real patient engagement, and we've got to shift in our organisational structures for how we deliver healthcare. Can we do it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Will we do it? Well, I'm not sure. I hope so. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. A massive subject in a short space of time, and I really appreciate your giving us a lot of food for thought there, in particular, king for a day. And I want to move on with and invite Adele Seaman to give us a perspective on an industry that she loves and works in, where kings and queens reign. And indeed, there can be no dispute about the kings and queens that run our resources sector. So it would be lovely to hear, Adele, how has that industry already done a lot in terms of its utilisation of technology to change the way workforces are engaged and move forward, and what do you see the future holding for us?
Thanks, Dennis. I'll start with unmuting myself. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the elders of other communities who may be here today. So I've been delighted to hear the previous speakers highlight the importance of people at the centre of the future for workers also. And I thought before I'd start, I'd quickly give you a bit of a background, because I'm a bit different to everyone else who's presenting here today. So originally training as a geologist, I've spent the last 10 years in a space where research and technology aids the success of the mining industry, developing, brokering and facilitating global research and technology programs that have application across the mining value chain. I describe what I do as herding butterflies, because herding cats isn't complex enough. And I bring together operating companies, mining equipment, technology service providers, NGOs, government agencies and research organisations. And these complex partnerships have given me an extensive insight into how the mining industry is positioned to adopt technology and how it positions itself to do so through ideation and innovation. And I've recently founded my own company to help the industry deliver on its mandate in a very fast-changing environment. So from my experience, I'll make some general observations about the mining industry, trying to keep it brief for Dennis. And I'll start with the fact that it's renowned for a slow pace of innovation. Someone once described it as having a heartbeat of just once a century. And I've heard it postulated that this is due to the impact of geological time on human endeavours to move rock. But seriously, it's more likely because of rigid infrastructure and perhaps because of the disparate skill sets that are required to find, define, and mine an ore body. It's recognised that it takes around 20 years for a new mine to achieve acceptance, a new idea, to achieve acceptance with companies using only proven technologies in their mines. And indeed, in my experience, the industry has shown preference in general for incremental performance improvement over more disruptive step change innovation. Next slide, please. But for a while now, we've been in a rapidly changing world. And most recently because of COVID and the associated disruptions, but prior to this, because of an increasing competition for scarce quality resources in search spaces that are largely unknown. And adding to this, there's a change tolerance for how the industry itself operates, from local communities, governments, and the investment community itself. In our current rapidly changing environment, uncertainty is ever present, and companies need to learn to navigate it either by, as the new workforce report suggests, stress testing existing business models or finding new ones faster. So next slide. So firstly, how mature are our collaborative efforts, which I would add that we need these to address complex problems that are multidisciplinary and too risky and costly to solve individually. Well, from my experience, creating and facilitating collaborations, I've learned that there are a few essential ingredients that typify successful collaborative efforts, where success is defined as delivering learnings or technology that's ready for adoption. And firstly, these complex partnerships must be built on a foundation of mutual trust and transparency. Otherwise, they'll be purely transactional and unlikely to lead to sustainable or substantive innovation. And I've seen a lot of collaborations that are really cooperations. For example, where a mining company works with an equipment provider to adapt technology for an application in a mining company's operations. In addition, the industry and its collaborators really need to have a shared and sustained focus. And there are examples over Australia's history where the mining industry has arguably got it right. And for example, when the CEOs of Australia's major mining companies came together in 1959 to establish the Australian Minerals Industry Research Association on the recognition that the sector requires sustained investment in research to develop the capability required to address mining industry challenges, effectively creating an innovation ecosystem. Since then, though, the sector has become increasingly fragmented and competitive, failing to understand, I would argue, that where its competitive advantage lies and where the industry gains from sharing knowledge and know-how in collaborations. Often collaborative partnerships exhibit too many vested interests and knowledge gaps. So driven by our changing times, collaboration intensity is on the rise. And we see many types of collaborations, some of which are relatively new for our sector. So next slide, please. So these collaborations are currently focused on decarbonising mining operations and developing technologies that enable this, whether they're solutions for mine electrification, development of battery infrastructure, or new green and safe energy sources. We are seeing operating companies come together with METS providers supported by research organisations to address these challenges. And there's recognition that innovations from other sectors can be integrated into the mining industry itself. And we're seeing a prevalence for an open platform approach to searching for solutions. So with this in mind, where's the focus of technology adoption by the industry? And are we making best use of the areas that are highlighted, for example, by groups like McKinsey, next slide please, as being technically mature and most ripe for adoption? So there are a number of critical technologies that the mining industry employs in everyday work, and it does so to enable remote operation autonomously with a high volume of complex data to analyse for decision-making. It's been argued that Australia's mining sector has world-leading technology capability in 4 key in-demand sectors: data and analytics, robotics and automation, safety, sustainability and social license technologies, and energy, including remote off-grid and microgrid and energy storage technologies. As highlighted in a recent PwC report, COVID-19 has seen the fast tracking of technologies to reduce the number of people on site and increase the ability to operate mines remotely. Our industry was already well positioned in this space, having adopted automation to address the challenge of limited workforces in very remote areas. To support this, we've heard about the concept of the digital mine, embracing digital technologies like advanced analytics, the Internet of Things and robotics to achieve the nirvana of automating decisions across the mining value chain. This requires seamless integration of equipment, machines, process operations and information systems. To achieve the vision of the digital mine, we need to be able to effectively measure and control processes in real time through the use of sensors, analyzers, and smart instruments. And we need to capture real-time plant and material characteristics. There are many and varied technologies enabling this, but often missing is the ability to integrate these seamlessly and in real time, and use these to drive operational decisions. Too often, we've got barriers to improvement, including proprietary or legacy systems that don't talk to each other, and an inability to share data and knowledge across the life cycle of the mine. And this is impeding transformation. We're seeing engagement with machines to help us solve problems, but is this actually helping us? Are we doing so in the right way, ensuring our house or our data is in order, and that machines are guided by human experts? I would argue that this is where part of the problem with how the industry is positioning itself to make best use of technology lies. So let's explore that a little further. What's lacking with how we do innovation at the moment, and how is this impacting our ability to generate and incubate ideas? From the human aspect, even within one company, we see different drivers and different rewards for behavior. Productivity is an imperative, meaning that collaboration is sometimes seen as a distraction. We know we need to engage beyond people in companies who only notice day-to-day problems. And some companies are already addressing this through the establishment of positions like implementation officers or transformation technologists or innovation engineers. Companies themselves are defining programs like incubator accelerator programs designed to create mutual value for collaboration partners rather than transacting an experiment for funding. I've seen many examples of companies failing to follow through their support of collaboration and innovation by failing to resource the uptake of the research outcomes in the same way they support the R&D collaboration, or by inhibiting commercialization of research outcomes in a timely manner through discontinued funding and a lack of sustained focus. And I can't leave this topic without highlighting a couple of additional areas that are impeding technology development and adoption, including the need to let go of IP concerns. It's recognized that the pace of technology development that is so great that the industry needs to open itself up to get help from other sectors. It needs to embrace open source platforms rather than proprietary systems. And positively, we are seeing some service providers moving into a new model of selling software as a service rather than a license, meaning that this transition is a possibility. Additionally, we need to give ourselves and our collaborations permission to fail, and we need to position ourselves to learn from that failure. We see a regular loss of corporate memory hindering this. Next slide, please. The opportunity for the mining industry, as we've demonstrated over the past couple of years, is in strengthened virtual collaboration and in virtual education. The industry is pressured to evolve itself and its activities to fit a carbon-constrained environment, and it needs to do so fast. There are novel spaces ripe for collaboration in areas like at the intersection of technology and humanity, where we need effective governance as we ensure that technologies are adequately guided by humans. We need to explore the benefit to be gained from automation, and we need rules for our technology tools. We can further explore applications of machine learning, for example, to wearable technologies and motion and image analysis, always guided by humans. And we can explore applications for and the technology development needs of drones and the policies surrounding their use. And we need facilitated mechanisms to explore for technologies developed outside of our sector. So as indicated by the aspirations the industry has for its technology enablement, which are mining with a smaller footprint, reduced use of water and energy, and producing less waste in the process, the industry needs geologists, mining engineers, and metallurgists, but we also need the numerically literate. We've already seen the rise of the data scientist. We need more who are able to assist us to work with data in different ways, with machine-supported decision-making. And we need to be aware that we're competing with other more attractive and market-savvy industries for these skilled people. I also want to highlight the value of experiential learning opportunities, something that a number of universities and companies have already recognised. A current example is demonstrated by the Core Learning Foundation in WA, where through a partnership with the Mineral Council of Australia and BHP, they have gamified some of the earth science curriculum for secondary students, giving these students exposure to problem solving in virtual real-world mining scenarios that they previously would not have been able to have. And finally, it would be remiss of me to end without mentioning the current and worsening shortage of skills required for the mining industry, both in Australia and globally. Academia and industry need to move fast to address this crisis, as without the next generation of trained geologists and mining engineers, our sector, a significant contributor to this country's GDP and absolutely critical as a provider of material for society's transition to green energy, is in peril. Thanks, Dennis.
Wow, Adele, thank you very much. There am I thinking the resource industry has got it all together, and yet success breeds more challenges and more problems. Yes, it takes a long time, doesn't it? Partnerships are complex to make work well. And data scientists, well, what a fantastic topic to take us to the close of this part of the session where we've looked at industry. We've looked at what we've got in Australia, and I hope you're feeling, just like I am, a lot more positive about all of the things that are going on and we're thinking about. I want to move on now and introduce Dr. Ian Otterman. Ian's well known within the industry and within the Pearcey Foundation. His day job is Chief Data Scientist and CEO of New South Wales Data Analytics Centre. So you've made a great close and introduction for him there. More data scientists, Ian. He's an industry professor at UTS, and also because he hasn't got enough to do, he's president of the Australian Computer Society. And I've asked Ian to comment on a couple of things, really. One, data is and has been for a long period of time recognised as absolutely critical to these decisions that we need to make. But how do we bring these silos together? Because constitutionally, some of them are locked. And secondly, if we're going to have to train a workforce, and if we're going to have to solve a skills problem, Adele, that you just mentioned and others have mentioned, and we're seeing it because our borders are closed and we're running short of 2,000 technology and engineers a month. This is incredible, 24,000 a year shortage. Then we better get some of the old grey-haired guys like me back out on the street, and I need some retraining. So the idea is, is a professional organisation going to help and get going with government and industry to do some of this retraining that we've heard in these first 3 or 4 presentations? Ian, I know you'll have answers to all those problems. Can't wait to hear what you're going to say.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that I'm joining you today from Gadigal land. And thanks, Dennis, for the call out for grey hair. I took a quick peek at the attendees online, and some of you may not recognise me under almost now 10 weeks of lockdown COVID hairstyles. So it really is me. So great to join you again today. New South Wales recently released its Western Sydney program, which looked at the development of Western Sydney as a smart city, a smart place, to the timeframe of 2060, which is about 40 years out. And for many people, that seems like a really incredibly long way into the future. But we are talking about the future of work, and the infrastructure that supports that future of work is a really important part of the overall consideration. But when we think that that's really a long way out, if we just imagine a child born today, so born on the 25th of August, 2021, that child will be 9 years old by 2030. That child will be 29 years old by 2050, and probably in a very, very different work environment from what we imagine now. It may well be that child may well be in its fourth or fifth job by that stage. And this child, given the longevity, the increasing lifespan we're all experiencing, that child will almost certainly make it to the 22nd century and live until about 100 years old. So when we're thinking about the future of work, there's a lot of aspects to that future of work. We also know that along that journey, along with that child, the world is also changing. We know that we've got about 7.6 billion people in the world today. By 2030, estimated 8.5 billion. By 2050, 9.7 billion. And by 2100, which is even hard to say, 11.2 billion, best estimate from United Nations. We know predicting the future is difficult, but we also know there's some really important trends that go along with our population growth, with our changing planet. We know we've got technological changes. We know we've got climate changes. And we know that we have an aging, urbanizing population globally, but we see that writ small in Australia. Some of those trends are a little different for us here in Australia because we have unique circumstances, but the aging, urbanizing components are as true for Australia as they are for any developed Western economy. We also know that climate change is a bigger and bigger deal for us in Australia. So when we think about the future of work, there are a couple of undeniable aspects, and some of the earlier speakers have mentioned some of those aspects. Data is going to be important. Digital is going to be important. The increasing use of AI is going to be important. It's unimaginable that we will be able to increase the population, everyone live longer, and of course we will expect an improved quality of life without some pretty substantial productivity improvements and without actually addressing the challenge of sustainable intensification. We add an extra billion people to the world by 2030, no more land, no more water, no more natural resources. We've got what we've got. It's a closed system. The only thing we can really throw at it is productivity. And it's unimaginable that that productivity enhancement will not come without ever increased use of data, ever increased use of digital, ever increased connectivity, and to make sense of it all, ever greater use of artificial intelligence. And as we move to 2030 and 2040 and 2050 and 2060, the use of digital data connected and AI will not only become increasingly important, it actually becomes an accelerant. The more we use, the more we're able to use, the more we're able to use, the more we'll use, the more we depend upon it. And so our rate of use of connected digital smart will actually accelerate over time. The good thing about that is today, that means today is the good old days. Today is the period of time where we will look back in future and say the music made sense, children respected their parents, and everything moved at a much more reasonable pace, because we will never see a rate of change this slow again. If these trends really underpin our future world, the world will never move this slowly again. So there's a couple of other things that we know about the world. We know that we're increasingly reliant on complex technical systems in order to deliver that technical, that data, that AI, that future productivity. We know that the amount of energy we're spending on things like data and analytics is becoming an increasing proportion of our total global energy budget. And that may just not be acceptable in future. It may not be okay to spend such a large proportion of our total global energy budget on Googling things or for doing wayfinding. We also know that that increasingly complex system needs to just work. We can't have pieces of that system fail and leave us unable to depend upon that digital connectivity, that smart digital connectivity, which would underpin our future productivity, our future world. So the ability to rely on increasingly complex systems, which are increasingly being attacked from either individual failures or from systematic attempts to bring down networks, we have to rely on increasingly non-dependable systems. So that creates a vulnerability. We also need to be able to have systems just work together. So when we plug one complex system into another complex system, they just have to work together. Because if we try to do the good old-fashioned approach of plug and play, and it didn't plug or it didn't play, and everything's dependent on it, then we really have some significant challenges. And then, of course, we've got issues around preserving privacy and meaningful consent and cybersecurity in a complex, connected digital world. So the upshot of all of that is that we know that there are some almost inevitable trends: aging, urbanizing population, changing climate, changing where we can grow food, changing where we can draw calories from, but also the need to increasingly draw more food and improve our quality of lives. That sustainable intensification challenge creates some really big problems that are really hard right now to say, this is the stuff we care about. A few of the earlier speakers talked about complex problems which require multidisciplinary skill sets to address. That's incredibly much more so going to be true in the future. A discipline will not be, or a single problem will not yield itself to a discipline. All the easy stuff is done. I once said that we will never create another penicillin, a really simple molecule that has had such an impact on human life. We are really unlikely to get a blockbuster drug again, which is so simple in form. But we're, of course, increasingly able to simulate and prototype using not just digital, but increasingly AI. That folded moment when the AI was able to, as well as a field of experts, come up with a protein structure is a real watershed moment for us. But we do need another series of blockbuster drugs where we all get antibiotic resistance, all of the bugs get antibiotic resistance around about 2050. And by the way, in the modeling the UN does, that 2050 point is a big inflection. There's a big look what happens next, depending on things like drug resistance. So some of the problems we'll care about are, of course, the same problems we care about today. Increasingly, we're concerned about climate change. Increasingly, we're concerned about cybersecurity. Increasingly, we're concerned about efficiency of systems. But that dependence on technology will create brand new problems that we have not even thought about, or we're only just beginning to think about now. And if we put our marker in 2030, we know we've got UN Sustainable Development Goals, outcomes that say, this is what we want the world to look like. These are outcomes which describe things like no poverty, gender equality, life on land, smart cities. And we can work towards that sort of time frame. Our child born today would only be 9 years old by then. But really, we have to think about 2040, 2050. And some of the fundamental things that we need to do when thinking about the future of work is think about that multidisciplinary nature, the need to constantly adapt, the need to constantly work with tele, the need to constantly work with data, and the need to constantly engage with AI. Now, Dennis mentioned data, and in fact, every conversation I have these days is about data. It's often said that data is the new oil, or it used to be said that data is new oil. Thankfully, that expression is going away. I think data is more like electricity. And it took us a really long time to work out how to safely use electricity, how to get it from one place to the next, how to get it into the right sort of quality, how to not kill ourselves by using it, build the safety, the standards, the protections in place. But today, everything is either electrified or being electrified. Planes are being electrified, cars are being electrified. We carry so many digital devices around with us, which of course use electrical energy. I think data is a lot more like that. And I think that some of the fundamental skills that we need for the future include the ability to handle, process, understand data, not kill ourselves with data. Maybe that's going a bit too far with the electricity analogy. No analogies are that good. But the ability to use, manage, understand data, and use, manage, and understand digital services, use, manage, and understand AI are all fundamental, no regrets ways of skills that we should carry with us going forward. But the biggest opportunities we have are to understand flexibility, to understand multidisciplinarity, and to really think a lot bigger, a lot more long-term, a lot more holistically about the challenges we're looking to face. Sean said, we are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals, and that's absolutely right. Deep down, even if our hardware we can upgrade through prosthetics and various other things, the software we have running inside is pretty much the same as it was 50,000 years ago, give or take a little bit. The program running through it might be updated, but the material which runs that program is pretty much the same. We have an opportunity, I think, to really lean forward to address some of those challenges which are almost inevitable around consent, around privacy, around cybersecurity. but also to think much, much more significantly about the impact that we are already having and can have in order to make sure that the world of 2030 at least is a world that we want to have along with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as opposed to a world that we really don't want to have. And I'm pleased to hear everyone say that people have a role in our future. That delights me. Thanks.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. You know, this is an interesting world we're living in at the moment that is bringing so many things to a head and bringing them to the forefront. And it was interesting, I think, to hear how Dell started out life, dare I say it, with a shovel digging up the ground, and now you're doing what you're doing, advising industry on how to go forward. It's not the first geologist I've heard about who's made that incredible transition, and perhaps we have to think very seriously about the way we educate both at school and in universities as we go forward, rather than allowing it to continue to go down the path that it's gone down. It gives me really great pleasure to introduce Professor Jane Burns, who's been a winner of the Westpac Financial Review 100 Women of Influence. She's an industry and government advisor, a mental health and suicide prevention expert, and currently CEO of Well and Productive Cooperative Research Centre. I'm very, very keen to hear how Jane feels we are standing at the moment and what these challenges our speakers have introduced us to in their industries will set for us in another dimension. Jane.
Thanks, Dennis. And I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the elders past, present and future, but also to acknowledge that many people in Australia in lockdown are currently struggling with their mental health. And while we're here to talk about the future of work, and I'm an eternal optimist and a big believer in technologies, it is without doubt we are on the cusp of a global crisis in mental health, and the statistics are just staggering, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I think again we've got this massive opportunity but also challenge in finding the workforce to support the mental health and the well-being of workers. So I've been told I have to finish by 5:30, so I've got 6 minutes to very quickly speed talk. So I wanted to start with Peter. You are a breath of fresh air. I think we've been saying the same thing for 23 years, publishing on it. The Institute of Medicine in 1992 published a paper on preventive interventions in mental health. And I think back in the day in 96, 97, Australia was absolutely on the cusp of being a global innovator in person-centric care, the use of technologies. Reach Out was the world's first online mental health service for young people. Mood Gym was started out of ANU by Helen Christensen and Kathy Griffiths in 1999. Beyond Blue came to the fore, and we funded a whole host of technologies. And yet we didn't see the disruption that we would have expected. In fact, nothing at all. Young and Well was established in 2009 as a cooperative research centre. So Adele, I'm very keen and passionate about cooperation to solve global challenges. We had the first virtual clinics, the first online wellbeing system, the first geospatially mapped tool to navigate. And yet we didn't change policy, we didn't change the way things were funded, and it took a global pandemic to actually see that increase in telehealth consults. And even now, they're not innovation ecosystems, they're not making the best use of the types of technologies. They're effectively a person on a computer talking to another person on a computer. Most of our money at the moment is going towards crisis care. Our telephone hotlines are through the roof. The number of people ringing Lifeline just increases every day. The same too with Kids Helpline. And most of the federal budget this year was dedicated to mental health services, not to preventive interventions, and certainly not to technologies that would fundamentally change and create this virtual health system, Peter, that you talked about and talked about so eloquently. Interestingly, I have also reconnected with with your co-author of the 1999 MJA article. And Tony Jorm, I think, writes about it perfectly when he talks about prevention. We haven't seen any impact despite the massive increase in mental health. In fact, if anything, our outcomes are looking worse for both our young people, our children and adults. To Sean, I think, and again, I've been asked to sum up what everyone said to try to make sense of it. Again, we connected a few years ago when you were first starting to do these reports, pre-bushfire, pre-COVID, and we absolutely agreed on everything to do with the changing nature of the workforce, and that we had to think better about how we actually got this connection between the human and the technologies. I think you started with who knows what's going to happen next year. I think if anything, 2020, 2021, we expect it to be better. If anything, it's gotten worse. And I think there's probably two things to say. Leaders are exhausted. Anyone you talk to who has a leadership position in industry, and you would do the same thing as I do, they're exhausted. They're immobilised by fear. I think Adele talked about this. And change is actually hard. And it's easier not to change. So it's easy to stay the same and to accept the status quo. Without doubt, uncertainty breeds anxiety. We have the most uncertain environment we could possibly have put ourselves into with a global pandemic, and with everything else happening in terms of environment sustainability and the role of technologies. We were on a call last week with the chief scientist in South Australia, and her comments were, we're just living in a massive international living laboratory, a perfect storm where we really don't have the answers or know how to go about creating these new ways of working. And there are many, many, many things that we need to do further research on to understand how we might. But also, we don't want to be caught in a storm of inertia where we actually don't act because we're so petrified of what the results might be. Adele, I thought yours, in terms of herding butterflies and the slow pace of innovation, we used to have a saying which Michael Greg famously coined, in mental health, we move at the speed of mammalian evolution in terms of our adoption of technologies. And I think your comment about the slow pace, the competition that kills collaboration, collaboration is seen as a distraction. I had a chat to John Merritt, who's chair of WorkSafe Victoria, and he said, 30 years ago, they got together anyone who had anything to do with motor vehicle accidents, and they formed the TAC, and it was the only way they could actually bring together quite disparate ways of thinking to actually get huge change. And you see now we've got a reduction in motor vehicle accidents of about 80% from what it was 30 years ago. So it is possible, but it does take great time, and it takes the right like-minded people to come together to do that. Sarah, again, fabulous presentation. And I think, again, I agree with all. I've been watching the work of Deloitte for many, many years. Workers can do extraordinary things, and we've seen that happen throughout. But we've also seen that disruption has caused some catastrophic mental health challenges, which I mentioned earlier. So while our frontline workers are exposed to the fear of catching COVID, we've also got our care workers. We have 500,000 people on the disability insurance scheme, and they still require face-to-face services. So technology simply can't disrupt that workforce, although it should. And I look at some of the work of the With You, With Me guys who are looking at neurodiversity and engaging industry to put, people who live on the autism spectrum into jobs. That's an incredible opportunity for us to think about how we actually utilise our workforce, which has been completely underutilised. If you think about healthcare, in Victoria at the moment, you simply cannot get in to see a psychologist. The wait lists are through the roof. A month ago, I had, in the same week, 2 families ring me, and they're known to me, people that I know, it's not random, trying to get care for a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old. I had to ring a friend in Byron Bay to actually get these young people into care because everyone's books are closed here in Victoria. So we do have a massive challenge for our workforce. I fundamentally believe that technologies will be the disruptor that we need in mental health care. And then finally to Ian, your points around data and data and the way in which it's changed workforce. The data that's coming out of the occupational health and safety literature is showing us clearly that in many cases, workplaces break people. So the 24/7, on all the time, not having a distinction between work and life balance, the increasing pressure, all of those things do mean that workplaces can break people. So we need to really get our heads around how we can actually use these technologies as enablers, but also ensure that we think about our workplaces as care environments where we can actually keep people mentally fit, healthy and well, and that work is such a fundamental cornerstone to our mental health and our well-being. It gives us financial security. It obviously gives us passion and purpose in life, but it can also for many be extremely stressful and challenging. And we're seeing increases in occupational health and safety claims of 30% every year. It is literally, I think someone talked about productivity, I think it actually was you, Ian. We need to get better at measuring how do we actually create both well workforces but productive workforces, and how do we use those technologies to enable that to happen. So I'm going to finish there. I've gone 2 minutes over, but that was sort of like speed talking. I felt like we had speed PhDs in all of the previous speakers. So again, thank you for allowing me to be a part of just a wonderful panel and just hear from such influential and amazing people.
Well, Jane, thank you very much indeed. And I will encourage, whilst we're wrapping up and I'm answering, posing a few of the questions that have come through on the chat room, those of you that are still sitting there in your office at home or wherever, if you've got questions or points, please take the opportunity now to put them into the question area. Once again, all our speakers, what a great array of knowledge, depth and breadth. The overall issue that sort of surfaces for me, which you brought together beautifully, Jane, is this: we've dealt with a problem without thinking about the consequences of how we deal with this problem and what we should do in order to make certain that we can, in fact, follow through. And each speaker's touched on this, and I've experienced it myself, that, you know, sometimes we go rushing into a situation to solve a business or economic problem and fail to realise the education that's needed, the training that's needed, the support services that are needed. And I think you articulated extremely well the sad situation that we have, and I'm seeing it myself, even where I live. I witnessed a friend break down on the beach the other day just crying because she just cannot stand the pressure of everything that's happening, ironically enough. And these people are more sensitive, I think, than I am, but also it just tells us that everybody's different. There's no classification and age. And I want to raise a question here from Nilly. There's a real disconnection between secondary education and the real world of work and professionals. What can educators and carers, counsellors do within their schools to best encourage students to become prepared for the real world of work? I feel advocacy for change in the education systems needed, and outdated education processes need to be revisioned. And put your hand up if you think you want to have a go at that one from the panel, because I'm keen to hear from those that are involved in that sector how you feel about it. And I guess no one's putting their hand up, so I'm going to give you Sean. There'll be Adele, Peter, Sarah. Let me give Sean the first go since he sat there patiently for the past hour or so.
Thanks. I'd probably answer that question on two parts. One, from the school systems part, and that I think we have this unhealthy focus on getting our students to a position of being able to regurgitate content and focus on being very good at explicit knowledge. I think that needs to be balanced with developing those uniquely human skills. I've got a 7-year-old about to turn 8-year-old daughter, and I watch the incredible creativity and imagination and just the innovative problem solving that she uses to do things. And somehow that gets completely expunged by the time she'll get into secondary school. And I think that we have to balance Yes, we need to have an expertise, and yes, we need to train our brain and to make neural connections in a way that is going to help make us be able to solve complex problems, but it has to be balanced with that creativity. In terms of the students, I genuinely think that it's about, taking intellectual risks, to put it, being, and I think this is the role of the school system, is to make sure that students are in a safe space to be able to do that. Taking risks is critical because as we're finding out, I think Jane in many ways said this, is that we're not comfortable being outside our comfort zone. So how do we make sure that the school system and university system, for that matter, becomes safe spaces for us to take those risks, to understand and to learn from them in an environment in which the magnitude of the risk being taken isn't that extreme, and to learn from that. We need to get comfortable being outside of our comfort zones.
Excellent, Sean. And just like the game show, I'm going to go with the way the hands came up. So Adele, what would you add to that?
Thanks. Just quickly, I think one of the things that struck me quite early in my career and has continued to strike me as I watch young geoscientists in particular come through, you can't imagine what you can't see. So if I hadn't known a physicist in my high school who was a geologist in a previous life, I would never have imagined geology as a career. I think industry needs to be present in schools where we're not teaching disciplines in those schools anymore. You need to find other mechanisms for making all those industries available to students. That's probably all I need to say.
Well, it's interesting because I was involved with the Australian Computer Society Foundation for a number of years, which was really focusing on helping the female students in schools and universities understand the importance of getting involved in technology, because it wasn't a very attractive thing to get involved in. Being a lawyer, because you could watch the programs on TV that glamorize law and these sorts of programs. We don't do a very good job of helping people understand that the industries that we have in Australia are actually very friendly, very good places to work. And I've got some personal experiences in there, which I won't bore you with at the moment. But Sarah, your hand went up third, so here you go.
Look, I think the others have answered this question brilliantly, but I'd only add to your comment, Dennis, around, we know that, perceptions about what a cool job looks like are formed very young. And I think getting closer to kids and giving them those experiences and insights sooner is great. So don't just leave it up to whatever's trending on TV for people to decide they want to be a vet or a lawyer. And secondly, I think just to build on your point, Adele, around there is absolutely an onus on industry with government support, but really on industry to be doing far more sophisticated sort of scenario planning and horizon scanning about what does their future look like, and then using some of that to really collaborate meaningfully with education providers about what does that mean for the content of programs and the kinds of capabilities that are going to be needed to deliver outcomes in that sector. So I think that collaboration comment I would echo as well.
Have you got anything you want to add to that, Peter?
Yeah, I have. I think we've become a selfish world. If you look at the data, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And we look at that, whether we look at whether it's sharing vaccines or whether it's the money we make from JobKeeper and don't give back. So that's the context. I think if we really want to change the world, then what we need to teach our kids is it's not just about me. It's about the whole world. And Jim Kim, I was at a Gates Foundation meeting a couple of years ago. Jim Kim, who was head of the World Bank at the time, said, we have an incredible complex health system around the world. We have inequality, and I think if climate change doesn't get us, inequality will. But what we have to do is to persuade the people of Earth that they need to take some responsibility for their own health care, and they also need to take some responsibility for the care of for the health of their neighbour.
Thank you. Now, I think this is a difficult question to answer because I've spent...
It is, it's a statement.
This is the next question that's coming. The last 5 or 6 years, looking at all these international surveys of where Australia sits in innovation and God knows where. And so Christopher Reed's asking, he focused it on Adele, but it was ignoring for the moment our system of government and politics, which is mired in inertia, not fit for today's purpose. Do you view the adoption of the model of accounting for organisational performance is different? And it goes on to a number of areas. And really what it's focusing on there, in my view, is we know how we run businesses. We know the metrics we run those businesses by. What are the metrics that we now have to think about when we're thinking about our talent pool, our human capital, developing? How do we do this? Come on, Sarah, you've got to have an answer.
Happy to, but I think Adele was about to speak, so I don't want to go on the top of you.
You're welcome to go first, Sarah.
Look, I think it's a complex question, and I think the measurement of human value is no longer just about productivity, obviously. A really quick answer would be, I think it's about engagement. It's about the level of empowerment. It's about how well you can devolve responsibility and accountability down in your organisation, because for me that signals, you know, you've got a really mature kind of organisation that is allowing people to step up and to really reach the extent of their own individual potential. So I think I don't have sort of one kind of pithy answer in terms of a particular stat. I think it's complex, but I really do think in the current environment that we're operating in, having employees that feel like they can bring themselves to work, that feel you know, engaged in the work that they do and feel empowered and skilled to deliver that work is what organisations should be focusing on.
Do you want to comment on that, Adele? Because I'd like to hear Jane's view on that one.
Just quickly if I can, I think Sarah, you've said it perfectly. What had come to my mind was organisational culture, and beyond that, everything that you do more effectively if you have an organisation that works as a coherent body, and it's hard to establish, it's hard to maintain, and it's particularly hard in these times.
Agree.
No, as a leader myself, organisational culture I've always seen as the way we do things around here. And if you want to change culture, then you better change the way you do things around here. And Jane has mentioned, you know, just how tired everybody is, how tired leaders are. Jane, how can we change?
I don't know how we can change, but I wanted to add to the thought bubbles and echo Peter's comments. I think it was Jan Owen from Foundation for Young Australians did a survey of children and young people in Australia, asking them about what types of jobs that they wanted to work in. And I can't remember the exact stat, but it was a significant number of young people and children said that they wanted to have make a difference in the world and have a job that was meaningful and purposeful, and that they actually wanted to turn up to work because they knew that they were going to do something that changed someone's life. So again, I come back to, well, what are the skills that allow that to happen? The evidence is pretty compelling. It's things like kindness, it's things like empathy, it's ethical leadership, it's checking in on people, it's not being ruthless and cruel, it's being kinder to each other and to fellow workers. It's all of those things that unfortunately the data is not showing us is happening at the moment. And, you know, again, I was same thing, on a call today with a woman over in Newcastle trying to find a vaccine for my 15-year-old who's on the NDIS. And she'd had 500 calls a day being abused by people because they couldn't get into a vaccine centre. So that's the sort of disconnect we've got between all the things that we want people to be, but the reality of what people actually are. And you can see it happening. It doesn't matter if it's a small business, a large business. It doesn't matter if it's sort of responding to crisis support. People are genuinely really good until they're not, and then they're cruel.
Yeah, I've got one more question I want to raise and direct to Ian, but Sean, you want to pass a quick comment on Jane's point?
Just a general comment. I'm going to be a little bit provocative here, if I may. And I don't think any of us is, we're all very aware of the hyper focus on skills. I'm a little bit worried that we're too hyper focused on skills, partly because increasingly organizations are turning work into very discrete, bundles of work, and that can be codified and disrupted by digital technologies, basically. And we're increasingly breaking down work into these discrete bundles. We get a human to do it with a very specific skill. And then, at some point, a technology is actually going to be able to do that. I'm not saying that humans don't need skills. Of course we do. I just think that we have almost an unhealthy obsession with only skills. And that since when did it become our job just to be able to do a task? I think increasingly we need to remember there's a human in the worker, and we have to develop that.
I think it's a lovely point. Thank you very much indeed for making that. And I think you're absolutely right. This last question before we start to close, comes from Laurent Alliers, and it's really a comment. He says, data analytics is part of our future. There's no denying this. However, on top of the technological difficulty, the trick is to know what the question is to ask the data, Ian.
Thanks, Dennis. Before I go to that, I just want to underline what Peter said. I think inequality is what's going to get us. Climate change might be competing with inequality, but it's a related element. And I really like the statement that it's the human that we have to develop. There are a whole lot of things that people are uniquely good at, and a whole lot of things that people are just not good at. And anything that can be made into a little task will be automated, guaranteed. So getting back to the data analytics part, there's a couple of aspects to this. When I started with New South Wales government, I had the great opportunity to lead the Data Analytics Centre, and we spent a lot of time tackling wicked policy challenges, complex, subtle problems that really they persist, but ultimately have people's behaviour at their heart. And the approach we took was to push really hard on a question, with the framing that if you had access to any data set that you could possibly imagine, what's the most powerful question you could ask that helps you understand that problem, understand what the root cause is, and when or what you might do about it. And it was a very, very powerful technique to break people out of their, well, I can only do this because I've only got these levers and I've only got access to these data sets. And now there's an increasing approach of describing things in terms of outcomes and being really serious about outcomes, big real world outcomes. It underpins the human services activities in New South Wales. It underpins the Smart Places strategy. And the outcomes are getting more and more people-centric, principles-based, very public, debatable, but then underpinned by indicators and underpinned by really powerful data assets. If we keep what we want to achieve, those outcomes in mind, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals as an example of what we want the world to look like by 2030, and if we keep pushing ourselves to say, well, what do we really want to know? What do we need to know in order to understand how this interacts with that, or how these complex systems work, then I think we can rehumanize data analytics as opposed to just playing around the data for the fun of it. If it's like electricity and we just play around with electricity, we wind up getting hurt, or at least at the very best, not doing very much. If we harness it well, we can do some pretty sophisticated things.
Thank you very much, Ian. And let me say, I personally have really enjoyed this. One of the great things about this part of my work is being involved with people like you that are actually engaging in industry today. When I was sent into businesses to fundamentally turn them around, the number one thing was data. And I didn't actually know the answers. I didn't even know the questions. I just knew I needed to look at the data. I needed to look at the data about the business. I needed to look at the data about the people. I needed to know if we had balance between the capital resources that we had, the talent pool that we had, and where the opportunity lied for the business. It seems a fairly simple approach to take. I was staggered myself how few people were willing to take that. And what did I find out? There's a big difference between those that are leaders and those that are transformationalists. We're in a period now where we desperately need some leaders who understand the imperative of transformation, and we need to find a way to get there. And I think each and every one of you have highlighted that, because if we don't, the consequences are dire, not just economically, but from the health system as well. I'd like to close this session by introducing you to say some closing words to Wayne Fitzsimmons, who's the chairman of the Pearcey Foundation, who got me involved in all of this when I was in industry some years ago, and for which I can only say he will top Ian's hairdo in terms of grey hair and the need for a haircut. So Ian, if the New South Wales Premier's feared new thing to give us, that after she's got to 6 million, which is to open hairdressers, I sincerely will be calling you, because truck drivers and others don't fear that a haircut is the first thing they need, but clearly you do. So once again, I've loved having the opportunity to talk with you. I hope our audience, and I think from the questions that we've had posed, have enjoyed this afternoon. I've enjoyed it immensely. And I hand you over to Wayne. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thanks, Dennis. And thanks to everybody on the speakers panel. It's been a very impressive start to our participation in the 2021 Victorian Digital Innovation Festival. And I really appreciate the contribution that all the speakers have, an effort that they've made to get involved. Unfortunately, well, in case people are not too familiar with the Digital Innovation Festival, it's been running for a number of years, and Pearcey has been involved right from the outset. And our Kelly Hutchinson, our Deputy Chair of the Pearcey Foundation, is the chief person responsible for the organisation of the DIF over the last 4 years. So this is our first event for the Digital Innovation Festival, and we've got a number that'll be running over the next 2 weeks. So next week, on Wednesday, the 1st of September, we'll be back online for the annual Pearcey Oration and the presentation of our Victorian State Award. Now, we're thrilled to have this year Jeremy Hershorn, who's the ATO Second Commissioner, as the orator, and he'll be addressing digital transformation, Australia as a world leader. So this will be very exciting. You've given an insight into how the ATS has leveraged a decade of digital infrastructure investment to empower business and community services, become what, by any standard, we're the most digitized revenue authority in the world and one of the largest ICT employers in the country. And it's, you know, one-touch payroll and all these things that they're innovating is quite exciting. They were able to do all of the things that have impacted us on COVID very quickly. So I hope you can jump online and register for that one. And on the screen, you'll see some of the registration sites for that. And on our Pearcey website, heritage.pearcey.org or pearcey.org.au, you can see all of these things. Then during the Digital Innovation Festival, we'll be partnering with ScienceWorks, which is part of Museums Victoria, working a high school students hackathon on the 7th of September with a lot of professional industry experts, some of them previous Pearcey Victorian State Award winners, and the Museums Victoria staff, and led by our Peter Thorne, Dr. Peter Thorne. And the question will be, how might we use artificial intelligence and machine learning to make our communities a safer place? So this is good stuff where we feel that Pearcey is bridging industry, academia, and students and government, and getting everybody together about some of the bigger issues that you've been alluding to, as the panel's been alluding to this afternoon. Now, as it's the Victorian State Awards next week, it is our award season as we work towards November, where we have our annual Pearcey Medal, Hall of Fame, and National Entrepreneurs. So we're talking about people who've run a risk, made a difference, and inspiring others. And our New South Wales, Tasmanian, and South Australian awards are still open, but they're about to close. All of these events, except for Tasmania, will be virtual for obvious reasons. So we'd ask you, if you want to nominate, get onto the site that's up in front of you. It should be on the screen there. And refer to the national awards will be in November in Tasmania. We think that'll be in person, all being well. The island state is isolated. So that's going to come up pretty soon. So on the 12th of October, in keeping with what we tradition last year on the Ada Lovelace Day, we're going to have a special conversation. And of course, as Pearcey Foundation, we're very conscious of gender balance in our industry. And you could criticize us as a foundation. You look at our website, we don't have enough women on our committees. We have quite a few, but if any ladies would like to put their hands up and volunteer to help us, it'll be great. We do get very good support from the female proportion of our industry in holding the events like today, like Ada Lovelace Day. We had 8 women, I think, last year. It was spectacular success. But we need, if people have got the time, to help us organise our events. Now, in September, we were going to hold a special event celebrating the 70th anniversary of the first computer conference held at Sydney University with CSIRO back in 1951. But obvious reasons, we've called it Writing the Digital Summit, and we've delayed that until February the 24th, hopefully in person in Sydney. Now, this has been tremendously well supported by University of Sydney, UNSW, ANU School of Computing, CSIRO's Data 61, and the academic institutions dealing with computer science. It is really the beginning of computer science that we're going to celebrate and look forward to what it's doing for our nation. And we'll look at, we will explore past and present future themes around human-computer interaction, the impact of automation on jobs and industry, the sort of thing we're talking about today, and how Australia can continue to ride the digital wave to ensure our future resilience, marking 70 years since the very first computer conference and the dawning of the digital age. We've put together a stellar team, and I'm looking forward. I certainly hope I can get to Sydney to see it. And friends of Pearcey, we can give you a special discount if you in the slightest bit inclined to attend. In the interim, Peter Thorne, Dr. Peter Thorne, Barbara Ainsworth and David Abramson, Barbara's at Monash, David's at University of Queensland, are working hard on some other exciting digital initiatives with IC, putting together virtual realities, maybe running virtual museums on we're going to try and do that on the conference as well. And we're working with Carl Smith at ABC Science Show. And so keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming up very soon on the ABC. You can find all the details on our Heritage website, and it should be up on the screen there, heritage.pearcey.org.au/events. So that concludes the events for our first event in the Digital Innovation Festival for 2021. Thank you very much to all of you who attend. I know it's been a long time, 2 hours, so look forward to seeing you next week if you could possibly join for the Pearcey oration. Good evening and thanks again.